Well, here we are at Hub. I'm glad you're at Hub. I'm excited and honored to be with you here, and we're growing in wisdom. I don't know about you. I think you're a little wiser this week than you were last week. We're in week 2 of our study through Proverbs, and it just seems like the overall water table of wisdom has just increased a little bit. And why don't we make that our goal to just continue to progress? Perfection is not the goal, but progression is. And we want to develop more and more wisdom as the time goes. And I said this on Sunday, and I'll say it again in this context. You don't develop a godly worldview overnight. It's not like you're saved and you're like, now I see things the way Jesus does. There's this process called sanctification where Jesus saved us completely. Like completely in a moment we're justified. But then it's a lifelong being sanctified. In a moment, Jesus says, I see you as you are, a sinner as you are, totally unrighteous, in fact, an enemy of God, and I will trade my righteousness for your sin. I'll take on your sin, defeat it on the cross. Now you have my righteousness, I got your sin. But there are still habits and mindsets and blind spots and selfishness and pride and things that cause us to resist developing this godly worldview, this godly perspective. But through the process of sanctification, the Holy Spirit is helping us. I really do think it would be the desire of the Holy Spirit in each of our lives to help us grow in wisdom. I hope you caught on Sunday just that interesting, striking image. When I read it, it punched me in the face. The thought that both wisdom and foolishness look almost the same, sound almost the same, and seem to be presenting almost the same thing. I think sometimes we get this perspective like righteousness is good and easy, foolishness is terrible and bad. No. It's actually a really complex decision. The decisions you've got to make are complex. The decision I have to make are complex. Moment by moment, what will I give my attention to? What will I give my affection to? What do I put my action towards? All of these things, my goodness, they're complex. And so it truly is that development of a godly worldview. And I made 3 points on Sunday, and I want to kind of just maybe shift them each a little bit and ask some questions that we can be pondering. If you didn't watch the message, maybe after Hub, go back and watch it, because there's probably some notes that you can take that'll help apply to your own personal quest for wisdom. I know for me, there's some things that I'm addressing and looking at in my life. But the first thing was, guard what you're giving your attention to, because when you fight with a mocker, they're just going to hate you for it. When you're correcting and rebuking a foolish person, they're just going to throw more insults, and you actually have this race to the bottom. It doesn't actually make a difference. But a wise person, when you rebuke them, actually loves you for it. And the question that I want to ask is this: how have you in your life generally responded to correction? I've never met anyone who loves rebuke. I've never met anyone who's like, oh man, I just hope everyone notices my flaws and faults and points them out. But when someone does, how do you respond? Are you the mocker, the scoffer who just throws insults back? Do you find yourself emotionally saying, oh yeah, well you? Do you find yourself name calling or justifying? Do you find yourself digging in your heels and crossing your arms, having a temper tantrum? How do you respond to correction? Or maybe, by God's grace and the work of the Holy Spirit in your life, maybe you say, no, I'm that person who loves it. I love when it's pointed out in my life. Now, if you're like me and you're more the first, we got some work to do. We actually need to begin to address that in our lives. How do we respond to correction from the people in our lives? And are we engaging only in, I'll bash you and you bash me and it's my idea versus your idea type of mentality, or are we giving careful listening wisdom to the wise voices in our life who bring correction and thanking them for it and inviting it? You know, at Vivid, we would say this: we want to encourage always. We want to celebrate all the time. We'll coach when invited to. We only want to correct when we have to, when it's blatantly obvious that correction needs to come. But I want to live in that sweet spot, that middle section where I have invited coaching in my life, where I've said to my friends, I've said to my pastors, I've said to those in my life that I look up to and aspire to be like, hey, just so you know, you've got room to speak into my life and I've got ears to hear what you have to say. That's one of the greatest ways you can start with wisdom right now. The second point on Sunday was about developing a godly worldview. It says this: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And if you have begun well, you're already halfway there. You're on the right track. You've aligned yourself to the right perspective. But that thought of fear is not being anxious when God's around. It's not being stressed out by what God might think of you. It's actually saying, God, you are the only one who can guide my emotions, who can guide my affections, who can guide my actions. Like, you're the one I'm giving my focus to, my function to and my feeling to, or you're the one that I'm giving my attention, my affection, and my action. There's all sorts of good preaching, same letter homiletics that I could use, but catch this. I want to ask you the question, what has that seed in your life right now? Really, on Sunday, I'm saying, hey, let's just not let anything else have it. Let's eradicate fear in our life. But what right now do you fear? What people think? Failure? Not aligning with your own, ideals for your life, saying, I wanted to be here, but I'm only here. What do you fear? Discomfort? What do you fear? Feeling stupid? Like what is that thing that's guiding your emotions right now? What do you fear? What the people might say. What about the mob? Like if people disagree and I get called out, some people, their greatest fear is getting called out. What are you fearing? What are you giving your attention to? And for some, even with the greatest intention, you're like, no, my greatest fear would just be a future that's not better than the present. And that's a good thing to live towards. But if you start developing anxieties about a terrible future, that's not what God sees. When God looks to the future, he says, we've all been brought out of darkness and into light, meaning our future is actually bright. With the Spirit in our life, we do have a bright future. We do have a hope. We do have this security that comes in Jesus. So what are you fearing? And is there maybe some things you can do to displace those fears and to put Jesus back in that place in your life where you fear him only? And then the third thing was around what are you feeding? What are you feeding into? Because what you feed will feed you. What you pour your energy into will actually be what you nourish yourself on. And in a really funny sense, like your feed, the things you're being advertised to right now, have everything to do with what you've looked up on Amazon and what you've searched on Wikipedia and the videos that you've left comments on. It has everything to do with it. And so you might be seeing the exact same political rhetoric over and over and over because that's what you are feeding into your mind. You might be seeing the same sales pitch for that quick, easy, 50-pound weight loss with no effort, no energy, no exercise, and no change in diet. It's a lie, by the way. But you might be seeing all of those types of things because it's what you're feeding into. And I think one of the greatest questions we could ask ourselves is, at the micro level, if this were all I was feeding on at a macro level, would I be healthy or would I be malnourished? Like, think about it. What you are feeding on, even in the little morsels here and there, it's, will this nourish me or will I be malnourished? Like, it's hard not to get overly legalistic. It's hard not to get overly cautious and conscientious and say, well, if it's not what I could feast on only, then I'll never taste it. It's like a person who's like, I'll never have another candy in my life because I couldn't feast only on candy. The truth is, we have to start with the most healthy things. I mean, it could be that there's the odd time where you say, you know what, this is not this comedic sketch, for instance, is probably not going to nourish me holistically the rest of my life. But I've been investing so much good into myself that I'm building on that I'm laughing at this. Now, if it's ungodly, it's actually more than just malnourishing you, it's poisoning you. And so I would say we need to make a really hard line and say, I'm going to eliminate what is ungodly and unwise and poisoning me. I'm going to really limit the things that are just blank, empty, because my time's too precious, my energy is too precious, my attention is just too much of a valuable, treasured commodity. And I'm going to give the majority of my time, effort, and energy into focusing on things that really actually will feed me and feed back into me. Because if I'm wise, I reap the reward of wisdom. I know so many people are like, I just have no time to read my Bible. It's like, well, you do. Like, no one doesn't have time to read their Bible. Oh, I just have no time for prayer. I mean, no one works that much. I have no time for community. Like, I'm in a hub 3 times a month. I have no time for that. Well, like, you do. You're just choosing to put that time in other things. And I want to challenge us. Let's be the type of church that instead of blaming time, instead of blaming the limitation of resources, instead of blaming COVID, because of COVID, I couldn't do this or that. Let's really take ownership of, I'm going to feed myself with what's actually going to benefit me the most. So I'm going to begin with the things that God says matters the most. I'm going to start with wisdom and then I'll grow from there. Is that helpful? I hope that's helpful. So a few things for us to discuss. If a hub was just a lecture, I think it really is like on demand at your own time, do it at your own, like write a little test later. But it's really more about community engagement, and that's why you being here matters so much. It's why I think we need to take a moment and honor those who lead these hubs, because thank God they would open their time and open their lives, maybe even just open their computer screen to host on Zoom. But I know many of you now are meeting in person as well. Let's be grateful to those people, and let's actually engage in a conversation that's going to help us grow. So how do I respond to correction? And what are the things that I presently fear that I need to move out of the side? And am I feeding myself with the types of things that'll leave me poisoned, malnourished, or nourished? Let's eradicate those things. Let's really limit these things. And then let's give ourselves wholly to the things that'll nourish us. Love you guys so much. We'll see you on Sunday.